Now, it might surprise you to learn, or more likely you've never really thought about it, that footballers did not always wear numbers on their shirts. And in fact, it wasn't until the first home game of the 1928-29 season when legendary Arsenal manager Herbert Chapman became the first to send out players with numbers on their backs. Now, he is credited with coming up with the idea, but that's not quite the whole story, as Chelsea also played with numbered shirts that day. It's not really clear who gets the credit, so perhaps it should just be shared. Arsenal's opponents on that day, Sheffield Wednesday, were not wearing numbers, and although the press picked up on the story in the Monday editions declaring the innovation a success, the FA decided they wouldn't allow it. Now, I don't really know why, but I would suggest a possible reason was that the owners of the clubs did not want to incur the additional expense. It is, of course, cheap to replace a shirt without a number on it, and if that seems cheap, remember that even in the 1980s, chairman opposed squad numbers for the same reason. So it wasn't until a friendly against FC Vienna on December the 4th, 1933, that numbers reappeared. The AGM of Football League Management Committee met to discuss introducing numbers and decided against it. 5 years later, they relented, and Arsenal played in numbered shirts for a 1-0 win over Blackburn on August 30th, 1939. The outbreak of the Second World War caused all football to be suspended, and by its return in 1946, all teams in England and Scotland wore numbered shirts, and have done so ever since. Now, since the standard formation in those days was a 2-3-5, this meant that the number 7 typically was a right-sided forward. So the first Arsenal player to wear the number 7 was Joe Hume, 1926 to 1938, a Highbury legend. He played more than 333 games for the Gunners and scored 107 goals. In fact, he's still in the top 10 goal scorers of all time. He was part of the Chapman-era Arsenal that won the league 5 times, winning 3 himself along with 2 FA Cups, as well as being a runner-up twice, and would have won at least 1 more league title, but injury meant he only played 8 games in the 33-34 season. He did still score 5 goals. Now, he returned the following season and played 16 times, winning another league winners' medal, but by then inconsistencies meant that he was no longer instant first choice. He won his final honour with the club when Arsenal beat Sheffield United in the FA Cup in 1936 and was the only player in all 4 of Arsenal's first FA Cup finals. Now, look, I have to admit there are gaps in my knowledge, so I'm going to move straight to Geordie Armstrong. Born in Hebburn, County Durham in 1944, he was an apprenticed electrician who played works football with his older brothers. He had an unsuccessful trial with Grimsby, and although he was on the books at Newcastle, there was a mix-up and he fell out with the coaches, having missed a game somehow. He attended a couple of trial weeks in London with the Arsenal, in which he impressed the then-manager George Swindon enough that he offered him a professional contract, writing to him after he'd returned to Hebburn. A letter in which he says, "I feel you have a good future and you should do very well as a professional footballer." Words that were highly prophetic. He made his debut on the 24th of April 1962 in a 1-0 win against Blackpool. By the 1963-64 season, he'd become a regular. Now, the early 60s were a disappointing time for Arsenal, and Swindon had been replaced by Billy White not long after Armstrong joined. And despite a promising start in which Arsenal finished 7th and qualified for European competition for the first time in their history, things soon fell away. He was sacked after finishing the 65-66 season in 14th and was followed by the unorthodox appointment of Bertie Mee. Armstrong had matured as a player under Billy White and became one of the players from the era who became an integral part of the success that Arsenal enjoyed over the next few years under Bertie Mee. Initially losing 2 successive cup finals in 68 and 69, he was voted Player of the Year in 70 and when Arsenal won the Fairs Cup. He played every match in 1971, winning the league and FA Cup double, an achievement only one other team could boast, Tottenham, having completed it in 1961, the year George signed for Arsenal. His goal tally may not seem impressive at only 68, but it is said that he played part in over half the goals scored that season, including his cross to Ray Kennedy to set up the winning goal in the last match of the season at White Hart Lane, a goal that secured the title there. At his peak, it was said that if you don't stop Armstrong, you don't stop Arsenal. He was equally capable on either wing, and his crossing ability was peerless. A natural athlete who, famed for his consistency and reliability, he went on to set a record for appearances, having played a staggering 621 competitive matches over 15 years, including 500 in the league. In this period, Alf Ramsey, the England manager, famously preferred a wingless style of football, so Armstrong never received a full cap, despite playing at youth level 5 times. He's arguably the greatest player never to have played for his country. He stayed at Arsenal until 1977 when he fell out with then-manager Terry Neal and spent one season at Leicester where he played only 14 times, and one season with Stockport County followed before moving to Norway as manager of FK Mjølner. He was eventually made head coach of the Kuwait national team but returned to England before the Iraq War in 1990, where his former colleague George Graham offered him a job as coach. This was his last job and cemented his legend, playing a part in building the great sides of the 90s under first Graham and then Wenger, who had enormous respect for him and even joked that he was fit enough in his 50s to be considered for starting 11. When Armstrong, who'd never been ill a day in his life, collapsed at the training ground, it was Arsene who removed his boots. He passed away of a brain hemorrhage the next day at only 56, and the church service was so crowded people had to stand outside. One of the most loved and faithful servants to the Arsenal. He will always be remembered as one of our greats and is depicted on the stadium mural alongside Ian Wright, who frankly both deserve a statue. There then follows Liam Chippy Brady. Now, Brady joined the Arsenal on schoolboy terms at just 15 years of age, moving from Ireland in 1971. Signed as a professional on his 17th birthday and made his debut later that year against Birmingham, coming on as a substitute. His very next match was a North London derby, but Bertie Mee felt he'd had a poor match, and as a result, he made only 13 appearances for the rest of that season. By the next season, 74-75, he was already a first-team regular. Now, he cites Alan Ball, who was in the Arsenal side then, albeit struggling with injuries, as the best player he played with, and their midfield partnership kept a poor Arsenal from being relegated. The end of the Bertie Mee era brought in the partnership of Terry Neal as manager and Don Howe as head coach, which brought the best out of Brady, becoming the creator of chances for the likes of Stapleton and McDonald. Arsenal were lifted from relegation battlers to cup specialists, reaching 3 consecutive FA Cup finals from 78 to 80. Arsenal only won the Middle Cup, and that was against Man United, in a game which Brady truly shone. He assisted in all 3 goals that day and was unplayable. In 79 was Brady's best year. He was voted PFA's Player of the Year, becoming the first foreign player to win it. It was also the season that he scored arguably his best goal in the 5-0 thrashing of Spurs. The future was starting to look bright. But at the end of the 1980 season, and having impressed Italian giants Juventus in a semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, he announced his decision to leave to play for the touring club. Arsenal fans were devastated at the loss of their talisman, and the club did not win another trophy until 1987. Brady went on to win 2 league titles for Juventus, but the arrival of Michel Platini led to him moving to Sampdoria. He spent 2 years there before moving to Inter, where he also spent 2 years, and a final year in Italy spent with Ascoli, before returning to England with West Ham, with whom he was relegated in 89. His final season as a footballer was spent in the second division. After his playing career, he had an unsuccessful 2-year spell as manager of Celtic, in which he did not win a trophy, and then similarly unsuccessful spell in charge of Brighton from 93 to 95. He returned to Arsenal in 96 as head of youth development and academy director, a position he held until 2014. He's regularly voted in the top 10 players in our history and is arguably the most talented player to come through the Arsenal youth system. Despite only spending 5 full seasons at the club in what was a period of underachievement, he had everything you would want from a midfielder: strength, balance, vision, technique, and an ability to glide past opponents. His nickname of Chippy came rather boringly not from any of his footballing exploits, but rather from his love of fish and chips. Oh, Rocky, Rocky. David Rocastle. Now for a player who lit up my first visits to Highbury, and who was easily my favourite player of the 80s. Rocky was apparently rejected by Millwall and accepted by the Arsenal Academy at the age of 15 in 1982. He was offered a professional contract by Don Howe in 1984, and he made his full debut against Newcastle in September 85 and played in 16 games for the rest of that season. George Graham replaced Don Howe in 86, and despite making sweeping changes to a poor team, the 19-year-old Rocastle kept his place. Now, I can't speak to why he's held in such high esteem by Arsenal fans who still sing his name 22 years after he tragically passed away at the age of only 33, but I can say exactly what he meant to me. He played football like a warrior, like a gentleman, like a master, and like a fan all at once. Incredible skill, fantastic work rate, and a smile that could outshine the floodlights. He was not just a fantastic player and ambassador for the club, he was someone who people loved deeply as a human being. David Dean, speaking about him, acknowledged that while you're not supposed to have favourites, he did. He loved Rocky. In fact, his wife brought him a leather wallet as a gift once, and instead of putting a family picture in it, there was a picture of David. Kind, thoughtful and generous man off the pitch, he never backed down from a scrap. He asked for and gave no quarter, and was someone who his teammates could always rely on. In January of '87, Arsenal travelled to Old Trafford for the most combative games in their history. The newly appointed George Graham brought with him a burning desire to win at all costs, and in the other dugout, another Steely Scott who embodied that winning spirit in the form of Alex Ferguson. This was always going to be a hard-fought football match. In the end, it was more of a brawl than a match, and Rocky was sent off for retaliating against Norman Whiteside. But watching that match back, it's a miracle there was anyone left on the pitch. The raw violence of some of those challenges makes it look a different sport. It makes the beautiful side of Rocky's game even more remarkable when you see just how tough he really was. Rocky is remembered for his work rate as well as his flair and toughness. Graham's system relied on his wingers tracking back and putting in a defensive shift as well as being able to counter quickly. Though highly effective, the Graham years will not be remembered for moments of creative genius and flair, becoming the 1-0 to the Arsenal years, which saw arguably the greatest backline in English football, along with the perfecting of the offside trap. Rocastle was one player who still managed to light up games with his class, and that was a key part of why we loved him as fans. Winning is the most important thing, but without players like Rocky, can it ever be enough? In '87, Rocky scored the winning goal in the League Cup semi-final against Tottenham at Tottenham that took Arsenal to their first final in 7 years, and finally played at only 19 years old and had his first taste of silverware. In '89, the unfancied Arsenal side won arguably the most dramatic league title ever, with almost the last kick of the game in the last game of the season. Despite having led by as many as 14 points throughout the season, they'd let the lead slip away, and Liverpool at the time were one of the truly great sides, had been crowned champions 4 out of the last 5 years. The game between the two had to be postponed because of the FA Cup, and the Hillsborough disaster had been only a month before. Emotions were high. Arsenal needed to win by 2 clear goals. When Michael Thomas scored the second goal deep into injury time, Arsenal had won their first title in 18 years and written their place in the history books. The future looked bright for the team and for Rocky. Arsenal's defence of the title fell apart the next year, losing 5 of 6 away games after Christmas, finishing season 4th. Rocky's form had deserted him due to injury. He had torn the cartilage in his knee in 1986, making a tackle in a game at Nottingham Forest. And although he had an operation to fix this, the rigours of the First Division, remember he was never present in the '89 season, gave him little if any time for recovery. In 1990, it had started to affect the range of motion and ultimately his form. He had surgery in early '90 and returned in April, much improved. This sadly came too late for Bobby Robson to pick him for the Italian '90 squad, so despite playing in friendlies ahead of the tournament, Rocky was not selected, Robson instead opting for David Platt. Rocastle started the 1991 season and was again involved in a brawl at Old Trafford, which saw Arsenal dock 2 points. He missed the next couple of months and returning broke his toe, then had further surgery on his injured knee. Arsenal won the league that season, losing only once and conceding 18 goals in the process. Rocky had played enough games at the start to earn a winner's medal, but it was a frustrating time for him, watching when he was used to being at heart of the action. The 91-92 season, now joined by his boyhood friend Ian Wright, and in a new central position, Rocky played 39 times in the league, scoring 4 times. But in truth, his best goal of that season, and indeed his career, came in the game at Old Trafford against Man United, fighting off both Ince and Robson in the midfield before deftly chipping Schmeichel from 25 yards out. Since the ball came back off the crossbar before hitting the keeper and going in, it's always regarded as a Schmeichel own goal. Somehow that makes it even sweeter. Rocky's last goal was also scored against Man United in February '92 from a cross by Wright. Now, George Graham recognised that his fitness was becoming an obstacle and accepted an offer from then champions Leeds United and ended Rocastle's decade at Arsenal. The transfer upset David, but also fans and his teammates, and reflects a colder side to Graham's winning mentality. everybody's time comes, and Rocky played one season at Leeds before moving to Man City. 1 year after that, he moved to Chelsea, where he spent 4 years, finally spending 2 glorious years in Malaysia, years that his family enjoyed as paradise years, enjoying the chance to travel throughout Southeast Asia. Sadly, David was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in October of 2000, and despite being told it was terminal, decided not to let friends know he was dying and bravely fought on, having chemotherapy, but ultimately succumbing on the 31st of March 2001. He's commemorated the Youth Training Dome, which bears his name, and he's part of the artwork at the Emirates. His name is still sung today. Now, Robert Pires. Arguably one of the best signings Wenger ever made, and that is high praise indeed. Signed from Marseille in 2000 against stiff opposition from Real Madrid and Juventus for only $6 million to replace Marc Overmars, who'd left for Barcelona for $25 million. His first season in England gave no indication of what was to follow, having been heavily criticised for saying that English football was too physical, and it seemed that he would be unable to adjust. By the start of the 2001-2002 season, he'd done considerably more than adjust. He became a key part of the team that won the double in 2002, cruelly injured in the run-in and missing both the FA Cup and World Cup. He was a huge part of the legendary Invincibles, playing on the left ahead of Cole at left-back and just in front of Henry, to create arguably the best left side of any team in the Premier League history. He won 4 major trophies in a 6-year spell, and his last game was a Champions League final against Barcelona. When Lehmann was sent off, Pires was substituted after only 18 minutes, a decision he later admitted had killed him, and made him realise that he'd slipped in Arsene's pecking order. He had been picked less frequently that season, with Ljungberg, Hleb and Reyes often preferred. He left Arsenal in summer of 2006 after insisting on a 2-year contract. Arsene famously only ever offered 1-year deals to players over 30. He joined Villarreal, playing 103 games for them over the next 4 years. He was followed by Thomas Rosicky. Signed from Borussia Dortmund in 2006, Thomas wore the 7th shirt for the next 10 years. A rare joy in what was by then a declining side. His career was sadly blighted by injury, and he managed only 170 league appearances in that decade, scoring 19 goals, only winning the FA Cup and Charity Shield in that time, as well as being runner-up in 2 League Cup finals. Then Bukayo Saka. Now, having previously played for Watford's youth team, Saka arrived at Arsenal's Hale End Academy, fittingly at the age of 7. He made his first team debut on the 29th of November 2018 in the Europa League match against Volksklaar Poltava, coming on as a 68th-minute substitute. He made his league debut against Fulham, coming on for Alex Iwobi, becoming the first player born in 2001 to play in the Premier League. And at the time of writing this, he has played 125 times and scored 29 goals and is becoming a global star. There is so much anticipation over his new contract, which he's expected to sign, and we wait with bated breath. I believe he has the talent, the heart, the mentality to be the greatest player on this list. Those of us who remember Rocky see obvious similarities. Both London-born players who joined Arsenal as boys broke into teams in a transitional phase for the club, had early cup success and found themselves competing for a league title. Both highly regarded as lovely people off the pitch and hugely admired for the competitive toughness on the pitch. Saka is often kicked all over the park by frustrated opponents and yet plays every match. Looking back at the legends I've discussed, particularly Geordie, Armstrong and David Rocastle, who are so similar in personality to the young Bukayo, it would be easy to think that their legacies could weigh heavily on the 7 shirt. But they're not men who needed to be carried. They are giants upon whose shoulders our young hero can stand and see farther, and show us all a bright future. I would not swap Saka for any player in the world, and I know that he has the quality on the pitch, on and off it, to do justice to their memory. He is our star boy racing down the right.